the state of women right now in the corporate world, I guess. It's just across things, in media, in technology. We're obviously in Silicon Valley. I'm just thinking now, because right now as we're talking, there's a big trial going on in San Francisco. Kleiner Perkins and Ellen Pao have a disagreement about gender discrimination, and it's going to put a lot of focus on that issue here in Silicon Valley. Talk about where you think we are right now. How are you looking at the landscape?
Well, I wish that I could give you a more optimistic evaluation of where we are. I think the Kleiner Perkins trial is just one manifestation here, right where we're talking today, of a world where most of the notes that have been rung about women, at least at the top of tech companies and venture capital funds, is not all that optimistic. I think in a piece in the Times on Monday about the trial, it had a statistic that really leapt out at me that said, I think women had been 10% of the partnership ranks at the major VC funds here in Silicon Valley, which, you know, maybe 5 years ago, which is not a fantastic statistic given where we are and what year it is. But actually that number has dropped to 6% now. That's an eye-popping decline. And I don't want to pick on Silicon Valley, because I think if you survey the landscape and you look at the situation either on the boards of the biggest, most important companies across the economic spectrum, or even in the media, which used to be, you know, in newsrooms around America and at the networks, we were just, it seems a nanosecond ago, celebrating that we had Diane Sawyer as one of the anchors of ABC News, and Christiane Amanpour, and me at the New York Times.
Right.
But you look now, and again, it's sort of, it's not necessarily a dramatic drop, but when you go from, at least we have some, you know, women really at the top, to suddenly, if you look at, and I realize that the broadcast network news shows are not the institutions that they were like when Uncle Walter Cronkite was there, but now suddenly we went from a world where there was Katie and Christiane and Diane, and it's all guys again, all white guys again, except for now Lester Holt has stepped up. But
so you have
I don't think it's a moment to necessarily celebrate what the highest leadership ranks look like.
So, Roz, you work for Intel. One of the issues, again, these statistics that Jill are talking about is the same in computer science, one of our most fast-forward industries, I think, in this country.
Right.
It's declined from in half the number of women graduating computer science degrees. I'm just pointing to tech because it's where you work, and it's still, there's a pipeline issue, there's all kinds of things. How do you look at the situation right now?
You know, it's interesting. When I started at Intel over 18 years ago, you know, I was this young black woman who wasn't an engineer, wasn't a computer scientist, so I was isolated in many, many ways. And so as I flip forward, I actually see it from an abundance lens now, because I go back to where we were 18 years ago, and I go to where we are. So I don't see it as much in terms of statistics. I see it more in terms of impact. So when I look up at Intel, and our president is a woman, Renee James, when I look up at Intel and some of our largest P&Ls are being run by women, when I look at our vice presidents, and it's not just, in all honesty, Caucasian women, there are other vice presidents that look like me. That did not exist 18 years ago. And so on one hand, you can get really bogged down in the negativity of the stats. But I also step back and say, but for my daughter, the opportunity she has of where she wanted to graduate and where she wanted to go is so different than for me, so different than for my mother. So whether, and I think this idea that girls aren't doing math and science, if that's the case, then medical schools wouldn't be half women. I think we have a lot of work to do in technology to have what we do be real in ways that are exciting. So I see it both. Sometimes I look at the stats and I get totally depressed, and then I look at the people and I look at the faces and I get very optimistic. But I will say, tech is still a male-dominated industry. It still is. And so when you go into engineering schools, when you go into computer science classes, the majority of professors are men. The majority of the folks that are in those classes are men. So the reality is that our society has to figure out ways to encourage more women, all women, to go into technology fields and to have that be as respected and valued as other professions. And until that happens, it's going to be very hard.